I don't know how to explain that. It doesn't really make sense in our world. But then I saw this light, and this light felt like it was coming toward me, or I was moving toward it. And as I got closer, I saw that it was millions upon millions of fragments of light.
David Bennett, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me on your show. I'm really honored to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming on. And if you guys are listening, grab some popcorn and a soda pop or some water, because we're going to have a beautiful ride, beautiful experience. I appreciate you coming on. And let's get started with you. Who was David Bennett before your NDE experience?
Yeah. Well, I was a pretty brash young man. I was self-involved, and that was mostly because being raised, I was thrown from. My mom was a single mom. Wasn't really popular to be a single mom in those days, back in the 50s. So she would put me in with families. She would place me with families on her own, not through any child services or anything like that. But she would just place me with these families, and then she'd find out that they were either neglecting me or this or that or the other thing, and so then she'd move me to a different family. So I never got the sense of belonging to a family or anything like that. And so I kind of developed this self-sufficiency of being, taking care of yourself because no one's there to look out for you kind of attitude. And in fact, my philosophy was you cut your swath through life. And that's pretty self-centered when you really think about it. But I did have some very good experiences. I'm trying not to paint it all black, but I did have some good experiences because at one point my mom decided to bring me back into her life when I was about 14 years old. We moved to Arizona. And so we were out there and I had some great experiences because I was this long-haired hippie kind of guy from New York, all right? And I really didn't fit in the Southwest too well. But the guys that I hung out with were the native kids that lived in the area that I lived in. And so their grandmothers saw the dysfunction that was in my life, and so they kind of took me aside and they showed me some ways to connect with myself, inner journey type of work. And so but then, in real life, you have to get a job. You kind of put that stuff aside because you got to get to work. You got to make a living, raise a family, all that kind of stuff. And so I kind of forgot about it until my near-death experience. But it served me well, this self-sufficiency and being, this cut your swath, because I became the chief engineer of a research vessel in my mid-20s. I was pretty proud of that.
I would be too. So you eventually have a near-death experience. I would ask you what a near-death experience is, but maybe you can just walk us right into it.
Yeah, well, a near-death experience is when a set of circumstances, whatever they may be, may bring you close to death or may have actually killed you, like in a cardiac arrest type of thing where you actually die. But then, something brings you back. You're brought back from the brink of death. And a lot of times when people talk about near-death experiences, there's some kind of barrier that they can't seem to cross. That's pretty common. And I'll share that with my own experience because, like I said, I was the chief engineer of a research vessel, and this was back in 1983. So we're going way back in time. But brash young man, full of vinegar, and we were evaluating a new ROV, a remote operated vehicle, a little mini sub type of thing, and we decided, but a storm was brewing up, and so we're coming back to the harbor, but the storm overtook us. There were 25 to 30 foot seas out there at the time, and the harbor master wouldn't let the ship in. So they decided to put a small boat in the water. And because we were just on an evaluation trip, we weren't on a full-blown expedition, we only had a skeleton crew on board. And so the captain, the deck crew that we had just weren't experienced. So he asked me to accompany the one deckhand who was going to handle the boat, and because I knew the harbor, whereas they didn't, and there were rough seas, and so we actually went down to the bosun's locker, grabbed some really old, ratty life vests that we had. They were old, like World War II vintage, the Mae West, the big puffy orange, pillows. We put those on, we jumped in the Zodiac, and we started heading in towards shore. Well, on your way in, we had to go up on top of a swell, take a bearing of, where we were headed, trying to find the harbor buoy, and then run the trough and back up on the next swell and do the same thing over and over again. Well, it wasn't long. We really lost track of where the harbor was, but we figured we could just do a beach landing because this is a Zodiac, and you see the Marines use it for beach landings all the time, stuff like that. So we weren't really too concerned. We figured we'd just run this guy into the beach. We'd get him to the harbor somehow, some way, and then we'd head back out to the ship. Well, we didn't realize it, but the storm had blown us a mile south of the harbor, and we ran into a breaker zone. In fact, our Zodiac, we drove it right off a 25-footer, and I actually caught air, and so I yelled to the mate, because I'm in the bow trying to figure out where the heck we are, where on the coast we are. We're still a mile out, and I yelled to the mate, turn us about. This is a bad place to be. And just then, the next one came. It came down on top of us, and it folded that Zodiac in half like a peanut butter sandwich. And I was in the bow, so it just catapulted me into the sea. And but I'm trained as a diver. I was trained as a commercial diver, besides being the chief engineer of this research vessel. And that's what we did. We did underwater exploration. So being in the water didn't freak me out too much. The water was cold, though. This is the California coast, and the water comes out of the north, and it was frigid. It was in March. And so I'm just hanging on to this Mae West life vest, figuring, okay, just protect yourself, because I'm being tumbled and tossed like a rag doll. I mean, it was vicious. But you can only hold your breath so long. And now I was trained as a commercial diver. So in commercial dive training, we actually get to experience oxygen deprivation as part of the training techniques that they use to, so that we wouldn't freak out, when we didn't have an air supply at some point. So I know I'm getting really close to, as much as I can hold my breath. And it's kind of funny in that point, I was thinking, geez, I was thinking of my regrets more than anything. And, but then all of a sudden, you start getting lightheaded because, your brain isn't getting enough oxygen, and eventually you breathe salt water, and I drowned. It's really interesting because the second that I breathed in the salt water, there's some agony and some burning that goes on with that, bringing, water into your lungs, especially salt water. But it was like just a flash. I was in absolute darkness. I was outside my body. And I didn't know what was going on, because I was just like, what the heck? Where am I? Because suddenly it was no longer, the ocean wasn't, roaring, because, 25, I don't know if you've ever seen those types of waves, but it's loud. And it was quiet. It was calm. It wasn't cold anymore. And so I didn't realize what was going on. I was curious. And I saw this, but there's an interesting thing in this darkness. I just died this violent death. Okay. And I find myself in this peaceful situation. So I wasn't really frightened. But many experiencers that describe this darkness, sometimes it's called the void, it can be a terrifying place. But for me, it felt really calm and peaceful. In fact, it felt like I wasn't really alone. It felt like I was a part of everything within this darkness. I don't know how to explain that. It doesn't really make sense in our world. But then I saw this light, and this light felt like it was coming toward me, or I was moving toward it. And as I got closer, I saw that it was millions upon millions of fragments of light. And they were all moving in unison. It was like they were of one mind, I don't know if you've ever seen a school of fish, how they kind of all move in unison, and there's multiple colors because the light refracts off their scales and stuff. And it's absolutely beautiful. Well, this was like that, but it was infinite. It was just huge. And so I kept moving closer and closer and closer. And as I got closer, I started feeling this immense waves of love. I felt like I was in this warm embrace. And again, I was in gaga awe of what was going on. I didn't know what was happening. But I started to realize that these lights, all these fragments of light, that they were actually beings. And as I got closer, 3 broke away, started coming toward me. And as they started coming toward me, they were welcoming me home. And, not with a voice. It was more of a knowing, more of a feeling, more of a, our senses just can't capture the feeling of this welcoming home. It was, and I felt like, oh my God, this is my family. Okay. Because I never really got that sense of feeling here on earth, but I felt like, wow, here's my family. And eventually a dozen of them came, and they were all greeting me and welcoming me home. And then they communicated that we were going to go deep into the light, into this area that was very spherical and like a big bubble. And we went inside this, and we started to relive my life. Now, when you talk to NDEers, they call it a life review. But it's more than just a review. It's not like watching a movie. It was like my consciousness had fragmented into these multiple streams of consciousness. And so I got to see not only my life the way I perceived it, but from everyone else's point of view that I'd interacted with. I got to see it through their point of view. So if I was hurtful to someone, I got to feel their pain. If I was loving to someone, I got to feel that as well. So I was in absolute awe of this. And the thing that really, really freaked me out a little, though, was that my soul family, all these beings that accompanied me into this bubble, were feeling it and experiencing it the same way I was. And so I was afraid, because I remember I was a brash young man. I really didn't have a lot of time for other people. I had my focus. I knew what I was going to do, and I was going to do it, by gosh. And so they got to see some of my unsavory aspects of myself. And so I was ashamed. I'll have to tell you, boo-boo, I was ashamed that they were, but they didn't judge me. They weren't judging me at all. They were, if anything, they were just loved me and supported me, through this whole thing. But I got to see sometimes when I would do something with loving intention without really looking for anything, I wasn't looking for a reward or anything, but I would just do something with loving intention, that it created these, I like to call it ripples, because I can't think of another word for it, but it was like effect and reaction, effect and after effect, so when you would do something like that, it created the biggest ripples. When I would relive experiences like becoming the chief engineer of the research vessel, which I was incredibly proud of, had very little ripple, so it kind of showed me that, we really, really need to be aware of how we're interacting with everybody. And so I went through my entire life review, and then I got to a point where I had drowned, but it kept going. And I got a little disoriented because I wasn't sure, I didn't have any reference to what was going on. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was actually previewing my life. I was looking into my future. And it was interesting because in the life review part, everything was crystal clear, absolutely clear. But when we crossed that threshold into my future, it was like looking down a corridor, and the corridor was very clear, but in the periphery, it was a little out of focus. And I've learned kind of after the fact that what I was seeing was events of potential, of what, like what I would have agreed to do in my life. And then, but the periphery, the sides were available to me, but they just weren't in focus unless I put my intention in that direction. And if I went in that direction, but it would always kind of nudge me back to the center corridor, and then I could go to this side or I could go to that side. But even today, I still like to say, weave your way through life because, man, you want to squeeze all the juice out of it. But I was, it really, I mean, why live a static life? Oh my gosh. So eventually I got to a point where the light, this immense light, millions of fragments of light, all spoke in unison. And it said, this is not your time. You must return. And I said, no way. I am not going back. I found a family here that loves me like I've never felt before. I just the love, and I know that body is broken. I know that body was broken, and so I just did not want to go back. And I argued with what I perceived as God. This all this unity of beings. I kind of perceived as God. So anyway, it spoke one more time. And it said, you must return. You have a purpose. And that word purpose just resonated into my being. And it's kind of a funny thing. When we're on the other side, we have this, like I said, my consciousness was able to split into multiple streams and things like that. But we also have this ability, this expansiveness of understanding that we just don't have available here. Our physical brains just can't expand like that. And so I got to understand the minute I heard that word purpose and it was in my being, I understood it. And it was so simple and it was so efficient. It was like, you could not accept it. And so I immediately came to acceptance. And when I did, I found myself outside my body. And the three beings that originally greeted me were with me. And we were watching my body. And it was still being tumbled and tossed. I was still caught up in that breaker zone area. And so was the wreckage of the Zodiac. And the bow line of that Zodiac came and it started, the bitter end of the line was tapping my lifeless chest. And I'm kind of standing off looking at it, just and in awe of all this. And I was saying to myself, I'm thinking, how is the enormity of me, because I'd become this light fragment, light being myself, how is the enormity of me going to fit in there? And and so a set of waves hit the Zodiac, and when they did, the line wrapped itself around my arm, and when the waves hit, it popped the Zodiac up enough, because there must have been enough air in one of the pontoons that it popped it up. And when it did, it yanked my arm and me up to the surface. And I just followed along. I just watched this all happening. And another set of waves, because my body got all tangled up in the wreckage, and another set of waves hit it and started pounding me up against the wreckage. And when it did, it pushed some of that salt water up and out. And that's when my soul family kind of gave me a gentle push, it felt like. And I just, this vibration, this kind of humming, and I came back into my body. It was but it's kind of funny, when you come back, I felt like I was half here and still half there. I still felt like I had a lot of that expansive awareness available. And I was having trouble staying on the surface. And I knew, instinctively, because of this greater awareness, that there was something wrong with my life vest. And in closer examination, when I popped it open and looked at it, the lining was dry rotted. And so the salt water saturated the fiber linings, and it was actually what was pulling me down, wasn't allowing me to come to the surface. And the other guys that were in the boat had stayed on station. And to me, they're my heroes, because they stayed on station. They were looking for me. They took a head count. They're like, okay, we're missing Dave. And so they were looking for me. And one of them had somehow hung on to a flashlight. And so they're like sweeping the surface whenever they could, whenever they would get between waves. And they found me. They found me in the wreckage, because I couldn't yell back out to them, because after breathing in, my throat was raw, and I was just kind of making squeaks and squawks kind of sounds. I really couldn't yell out. And so they found me, swam over to me, and then we all together made that 1 mile swim. But I had a dislocated shoulder and a dislocated thumb from where the line yanked me up to the surface. And so I had to just kind of hang on and scissor kick my way into the beach. But that life review, that feeling of love, all of that is what really, really stuck with me. I mean, it was like, what the heck was that? And to tell you the truth, I was an adrenaline junkie, diver kind of guy, but it scared me. It scared me because, one, who am I to talk and argue with God? Who am I to have this type of experience and stuff? And so I didn't feel like I could share it with my mates, who I worked with on a day-to-day basis, because back in the 80s, commercial diving and underwater exploration was incredibly dangerous work. And we put each other's lives in each other's hands every day. So death was kind of a taboo subject. But I tried to share it with my first wife. In fact, because we didn't have any vessel to go back to the ship. So we ended up having to go home that night after I got my shoulder, put back into place, my thumb and shoulder back in place. And so when I got home, I told my wife, I said, I think I died. And I didn't realize it at the time, but she'd had a dream that I died that very night. And so it scared the you-know-what out of her. And so she just, she's freaked out. And so I felt like, wow, I really can't share this. I can't share it with my mates. I can't share it with my wife. So I just I felt like I had to hold it in, These experiences don't let you forget it. It's so much. I heard one of the researchers one time say that on the other side, it's like hyper reality compared to here. And I like to say that it was more like this is the dream, and that was what was real. It just, so that reality sticks with you. It really sticks with you, and because of what you learn on the other side, you start changing. And so I saw how the way I was interacting with people and the way I was treating people just wasn't the way it should be, because it was, it was hurtful. I got to experience the hurt that I was causing in life. So I started changing.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. You mentioned soul family. What is a soul family?
Yeah. That's a term that I call those beings that greeted me, because it feels like, because afterwards I started getting communication. And at first it started out as just kind of like downloads of information that I had no way of knowing. It wasn't something I studied in school. It wasn't something that I'd experienced in life, but suddenly I knew things, and it was almost like remembering. It was really strange, but suddenly I would have these new understandings. And so, and then I had a second experience, and after the second experience, I started hearing the voices, and I realized that those were those 12 beings that had greeted me, and each one. And so and they felt like family. So I called them my soul family. Because and now some people, I've had people, I've talked to a lot of other experience. A lot of people would say, well, those are your guides, those are your angels, those are your, so I'm not real good with labels and names and things. So I just call them my soul family. I've come to understand each one of them a little bit better because it's been many, many years that I've been able to integrate this and be able to, develop this communication with them. And so it's really, really very much like a family to me. It feels like a family. So that's why I call them soul family.
Wow. You mentioned that you had a second NDE experience.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. People that have had these NDEs or NDE-like type of experiences, it kind of opens us up so that we can have these deep spiritual experiences. The second one that I had I wasn't anywhere near death, but I had an experience where in fact, I went back to where I grew up in Sedona, Arizona there. And I was meditating with a spiritual group. And I heard that voice, the light. I heard it. It said, return to the light. And I started reliving my entire experience. But this was 11 years later from my initial experience. And I got in that life review, I got to see 11 years of how much I had changed, because I didn't think I'd changed that much. In fact, I thought that I took three things from the original experience at first, because it was all that I could handle. The soul family, the love, the life review, God, all of that was a little bit too much for me to handle, because I was an engineer. I saw things kind of in black and white, and then suddenly you're thrust in this world of multicolor. It was like, Dorothy going to Oz, and so I just, in the second one, I didn't really think I'd changed that much, but I had adopted kind of this mantra of acceptance, tolerance, and truth. Because of what I experienced in the light, I could accept that this is who I am. Yeah, I need a lot of work on myself because, boy, I was not the best person. And tolerance of the situations that I find myself in, and tolerance for other people, because, many people cross our paths. And we don't always agree with maybe their choices in life, but it doesn't mean, that's their choices and they get to live their life, And so I suddenly had tolerance, which I never had before. That was totally foreign. And then the last one was truth. Now, when I talk about truth, there's a truth that resides within each and every one of our beings, within our heart, within our soul, that whenever a truth of that magnitude crosses our path, we feel it. It's like we come alive. We see a light. We feel our heart expanding. And so I call that personal truth. And so after my near-death experience, I took acceptance, tolerance, and truth. And that was kind of what I could deal with. And then that I kind of encapsulated that mantra as my near-death experience for 11 years until I had this second experience. And when I had this second experience, I had a dear friend, PMH Atwater. She's a researcher and an experiencer. And she told me that many times when an experiencer will repress their experience, which is what I really did, because I didn't share it with anybody, because I didn't feel like I could for over 11, for those 11 years. But I just took that acceptance, tolerance, and truth to be my own and tried to box up the rest of it and kind of shove it away in my memory. But it doesn't let you do that because suddenly, anyway, we'll talk more about that. But anyway, she said that when we do repress it to a certain degree, that at some point further down in our life, it's going to come up and it's going to, it's just going to come spilling out again. And so that's what I feel what happened. It was like I created my own spiritual crisis. And when I went into this meditation, it just all came bubbling up because I was at that receptive state. I was in a very home feeling receptive state. I was on home ground doing a meditation. And so I was incredibly comfortable. And so I relived this entire thing. Only this time I got to see those 11 years in that life review and saw how much I had really changed. And so that was kind of like the light switch for me that said, I have to learn to live with this experience in a way with accepting it all. You just can't piecemeal it. You gotta accept the entire experience. If I'm really going to integrate this into my life, I really have to accept it all. And so that's when I started seeking out other experiencers. And I found two amazing experiencers that kind of became my mentors. And they showed me how to live with this experience. They showed me that I wasn't crazy. That was a big thing because, you start to question yourself a little bit. Like, what was that? Was it just my mind playing with me? And there's lots of theories about that out there, about these near-death experiences being nothing. But when you start looking at the research, it shows that, these experiences are valid, because there's a lot of veridical things that happen within these experiences that can't be discounted, that science doesn't have an answer to. In fact, science still calls a near-death experience a phenomena because it's unexplainable. We just don't have the tools to explain it. Although it's kind of interesting that spirituality and science are starting to come together. The quantum mind and all of that sort of is starting to explain or starting to delve into spiritual natures within science. So it's kind of interesting how we're getting to that point. Maybe our future generations will help us out there.
What I usually say is science without spirituality is incomplete, and spirituality without science is ignorance. and what I've come to realize through my own awakening, near-death-like experience, because the old me died, it feels like, and I woke up and my whole worldview changed. I started looking through the lens of the heart versus the unconscious ego, and that St. Francis prayer at the very end of the St. Francis prayer means so much to me. Like, it came to life where it says, "It is only by dying that one awakens to eternal life." And I realized there's no such thing as death. And I had couple profound experiences myself, not a near-death experience, but a near-death, like what should we call a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening. And a lot of the scriptures, like ancient, regardless of what religion, they became, like, I understood them. I had this inner knowing, this inner standing of them without having to go to a Bible study every day, every once a week or twice a week, or hear a pastor or even have a Buddhist teach me what the Buddha really meant. Like, that stuff made sense to me in a whole different level than I could have ever imagined with studying it, just studying it over and over. Did you find that happen to you?
Exactly. It like I said earlier, it's like remembering. Suddenly you know things. Suddenly you're aware, and it makes so much more sense than sometimes the stuff that's going on in the world around us. So the spiritual nature began to grow. It's like these experiences plant a seed within us, and then as we nurture that seed, it starts to grow. Just like everything that has a seed, when we nurture it, it grows and it starts to bloom. And with that is a lot of beauty, when we start to let go of the ego, but we still need the ego to a certain degree because it is what gives us drive. It gives us some focus sometimes, and we need our logical mind to be able to pay the bills, So, So a balance, but we need to keep it in balance. That's the thing that I try to encourage all my friends that are experiencers, is to keep life in balance, everything in life. Because when you start to look at nature, it's always seeking equilibrium. Everything is always seeking, balance. And so, even death decays, but it nurtures the soil, and then it brings new life. So we need to keep that in mind. We've walked away from our indigenous roots, and so that's one thing that my experience brought me back to what those grandmothers were trying to teach me. And I kind of focused on that. In fact, when I came back, I was quietly because back then we didn't have the internet like we had today. We didn't have, and I was working many times, 300 to 500 miles offshore. So I didn't have the resources that we have today. And because back then we had ship to shore radio. When you wanted a phone call, you had to go through the marine operator. So it was, it was a lot cruder than it is today. Now we have satellite navigation and satellite communication and everything. And so it's a whole different ball of wax now, but back then you really kind of felt isolated, and I felt very isolated for quite a while until I found these mentors, until I started living my life accepting these spiritually transformative experiences that I was having.
Were you ever able to communicate with your friends who helped save your life?
I started changing rapidly afterwards, and there's a strange thing that happens, and it may have happened with you, because I talk to a lot of people that have spiritual experiences, and you feel like you get this calling, this feeling like you have to be of service. And so it wasn't very long after that experience that I left my life at sea, because I didn't feel like I was really contributing to humanity the way that I should. And so I left my life at sea, and I went into healthcare. But that's, that's a common thing. I know a lot of experience that go into palliative care, care for death and dying, and hospice and things like that, along with healing and all kinds of stuff that, the directions that these experiences kind of trade us in. So I've wished that later on in life, especially when I was writing my book, it was like, oh, where are these guys? And I tried to connect with a few of them, but I just never really was able to reconnect with them. But I changed. I'm not the same person. They wouldn't even recognize me probably, because I'm not the same person that I was.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. I remember after my awakening, I was getting on Facebook and posting stuff, and they would be like, my old friends would be like, "Stop messing around. What are you doing tonight?" And I was just a different person. I actually got off of Facebook because, it was just these profound changes, and I started to see, it's hurting a lot of people, and we can use it for good, or we can use it to create chaos and destruction and fear and all that stuff. So, so I had to take a time out from Facebook for a long time, so I'm still, to this day, I don't really use it. So I'm not saying it's good or
really
bad.
Common. That's very common, because, we find that some of our friends, we just don't see the same things the same way anymore. And so we start to distance ourselves, or we recognize that some of our friends really aren't healthy for us. And we recognize that, I need to take care of myself in order to be of service. I need to fill my cup in order to be of service. And so when things aren't healthy for us, there's nothing wrong with distancing yourself, so, and I see a lot of experiences do the same thing. It's very common. It happens all the time. So, and I think it's a healthy thing, because then you're going to find new friends, and your new friends are going to be more in alignment with what, with the way you want to live your life. And so then you get that supportive community, you get that fellowship that you really, that's a strong need within us that we don't really recognize a lot, is the need for fellowship. need for like-minded people that we can talk to. And when we find it, it's like you can breathe, you know?
It's been a challenge for me to find it. I mean, it seems like I scare people or they think I'm weird. But one thing the Buddha taught me in the Dharmapada, he talks about being willing to walk alone. You know, and I'm willing to walk alone. And it's hard not to have an awakening, not want to make change for the greater good and try to be more loving, more serviceful. It's almost impossible to have a spiritual awakening and not want to do that, in my opinion.
Yeah. I walked alone for a long time, but then I found community, and in fact, I help other experiencers to find community. I belonged to IANS for a number of years. I used to run a local chapter of the IANS organization. IANS is the International Association for Near-Death Studies, and I worked with them for many years. It's only just recently that I stepped away from all my IANS duties, and but the one thing I still do is because I have my own healing practice, which later in life, I developed stage 4 lung and bone cancer, and I had that was a tough journey, but it was something that I had seen in that life review that I was going to have to deal with. I saw that I was going to have cancer. I also saw that I was going to live beyond it, but I didn't realize how severe the prognosis was going to be. But I was able to overcome stage 4 lung and bone cancer within 6 months because I used the guidance that my soul family gave me, that and I combined traditional medicine with holistic approaches, and I was able to overcome this obstacle that we call cancer within 6 months. Our bodies have these amazing abilities, but that was part of a purpose that I was supposed to live, you know. So it really it was a big part of my life was going through that cancer, and even in that there was a spiritual component, because when you get a severe prognosis like that you have 8 weeks to live, and you need to get your affairs in order. Those are pretty, they could send you either over the edge but when do we, if we don't have a spiritual experience, when do we reach out for God, or when do we reach out for our higher consciousness? It's when we're at our lowest point most of the time. It's when we're suffering, that we reach out for something greater, because we know it's there. We all know it's an indelible part of being human. We know there's something greater. But a lot of times we choose to live in the physical domain and not really focus on our higher realms within the divinity that lives within us. We tend to not focus on it. So if we don't look at it, we can do just about anything we want. But once you've seen the divine nature that is a part of each and every one of us, you can't ignore it anymore. You have to start walking down that path. So I was fortunate that I had that preview in my life that I was going to have the cancer, and I was able to survive it. And it helped me to develop mindfulness practice. It helped me. I called it my quiet ministry for many years because I still didn't want to talk about it. That came later when Spirit, my soul family, kept nudging me to write a book about it. And then that changed. That was another new chapter in my life, no pun intended. But it changed my life and moved me to where I started working more with experiencers, and I became a healer because from what I'd learned in healing my own self from cancer. So and that's part of what I do now, along with speaking about experiences and trying to help other experiencers, that sort of thing.
In the Western culture, Western religion, we often hear about a judging God. And if you don't hold on to a particular label, or if you don't believe this way, that you're not going to heaven or the other side light. But is that wrong? Is that not true?
I can only talk to that from my perspective. I believe, because when I came back, that love was something that just astounded me. And so I started searching for love in all the religious texts. I started looking for it, because I knew it was there, but I just, you have to, but sometimes it's buried and you have to dig those gems up, so that you can find them. But I believe that, there's that one saying, there are many paths to the top of the mountain, And so I believe and we all have different lives and we all have different choices in our lives. And so I honor anyone who starts to work on their spiritual nature, no matter what path they take, whether they want to go through traditional religion, whether they want to go through shamanism, whatever, as long as they're, looking to their higher self, looking to their own divine nature, and they're working their way into that greater understanding. It's available to all of us. And I think that that's a shared purpose for humanity, for us to get in touch, to get in touch with our being, with who we really are. And once we do that, we start to touch that divinity within us. And that's when we start to recognize that, wow, I can really live this life in a way that is empowered, instead of just wandering my way through. So, yeah, so in answer to that question, I believe that, whatever path you choose is your choice, and it's, and how you get there. I don't see that matters as much as the fact that you keep moving and you keep, keep growing, keep moving.
Yeah, that's what I love about your book, The Voyage of Purpose. And maybe you can walk us through that, because when I opened it up, I seen a lot of universal truths from different walks of life, different religions. And it reminded me of the Miser Eckhart quote: "The theologians may argue, but the mystics understand." And it becomes universal truth, and the labels don't matter. It really comes down to love. And would you like to touch more on that?
No, you're absolutely right. What I wrote in the book was because when I came back from my experience, I was grasping. I wrote it all out in the book of how I was grasping for to get a foothold back in this life, and while you're going through that integrative process, you stumble across these universal truths like you're talking about. And then they take on a whole new significance in your life, And so those are the things I tried to put in the book, as I tried to put in the type of things that really helped me, gave me a leg up and helped me on the next step up, because, life is like walking up a staircase, and many times, you reach a certain plateau and you feel like you're stuck there, but then something will happen and you're able to see the top of the next step, and you're able to walk up and then make that next step. And then, wow, it's like a whole new life is beginning again. And life continues that way, as long as we look at life with wonder. I think wonder is one of the most powerful tools that we have in our toolbox, because if we look at life through the eyes of wonder, like a child, then we're looking for truth, and we're not looking to criticize. We become explorers, and we're looking for that type of truth that benefits not only ourselves but everyone else. The absolute truths, kind of like what you were talking about, what the mystics have talked about for years. So, living in a state of wonder is in a way living in a state of grace in a lot of ways. So, when we can be grateful and looking through life in a way of wonder, then I think we're really, really starting down that path. And that's when change is going to happen. Change is going to happen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you also have a chapter, The Ocean of Light, and it was a beautiful chapter. Would you like to expand on that And really, a lot of my listeners never read your book before, and I'm going to encourage them, some of my friends, to buy it.
Yeah, in fact, I was surprised to see it on your bookshelf back there. Yeah, the ocean of light is I write a lot better than I speak. So, which is, I'm an engineer, so, I write better than I speak. But when we allow ourselves, and it is a matter of allowing, when we allow ourselves to connect to our inner nature, to our wholeness, I like to call it our wholeness, then we get to see so much more that's available to us, because we're connecting to. Remember, I saw that, millions upon millions of fragments of light, and it was infinite. So it was very much like a ocean of light in a lot of ways. And each one, though, each fragment had strengths. Each fragment had different ways of approaching and empowering, their being, their essence, who they are. And so when we start to look for our own fragment of light, what resides within us, then we get to see that empowerment that resides within us. It's a strength that we all carry. A lot of times we don't go looking for it. And so it's that's the key, is we have to start the journey somewhere. But if you start with focusing on love and focusing, because that anytime we focus on love, we can feel that warmth. We can feel that all-inclusive feeling of being a part of everything, that we're a part of everything and everything is a part of us, and love is infinite, but it's a part of us and it's a part of everything. And that's the seed that can really launch us into our own ocean of light, our own being of who we really are. I believe, because I mentioned when I was talking about my near-death experience, how I was looking at my body and I thought, I was this light being, and how am I going to fit in the body, right? Well, what I've come to realize is that in life, we carry a portion of our divine light with us at all times. It's in there. It's in each and every one of us. But the greater totality of our being still resides in the unity, the oneness. God, it still resides there. And so whatever you want to call it, your Buddha nature, Brahma, whatever you want to call it, that greater sense of who we, that greater light, our divinity, resides in the oneness with everyone else and everything else. But within our human body, there's a fragment. And in that fragment is our connection. And so when we start to focus on love, when we start to focus on gratitude, because gratitude is another doorway that, that you cannot be sincerely grateful without being humble and touching on your own divinity. Because if you are truly grateful, you're grateful for everything. You're grateful, and this is a hard concept for a lot of folks, but I really learned this while I was going through the cancer, because that was my lowest point in life, the hardest thing. I had a collapsed spine. I had stage 4 lung cancer that had eaten away part of my spine. My spine collapsed, and I had lesions in my hip, my brain, my kidneys. I was suffering, but I found through gratitude, I could alleviate some of that suffering, because I could be grateful for the good and the bad. I could be grateful for everything. And when we do that, we touch on our own divinity. We touch on who we really are, our true essence, our true nature. And so that's that is another great gateway with love, gratitude. And we talked a little bit about, joy or we didn't talk about joy, but we talked about wonder, and you bring those things to bear and you can't help but change. I can't see how you could live life without, changing. And those are pathways. Those are, the mystics want us to learn, how to be human, learn how to love our neighbor, learn how to do these things. And it's hard in this world. It's hard in this world when we see chaos. It's hard in this world when we see division and we see people, purposely hurting each other. But we have to be stronger than that. We have to rise above. I like to think of it as there's certain levels of awareness. We have within us the ability to rise above the circumstances with our awareness. And when we do that, that's where, the Buddha talks about clear vision. Clear vision is a level of awareness where you rise above the circumstances that you find yourself in, whatever is happening. Because many times as humans, we get dragged along with the circumstances. Whatever drama-filled event is going on, a lot of times we get dragged along with it. It's kind of like mob mentality, and we get carried along. But when we stop, breathe, focus, go inward, we rise above, and we can clearly see the circumstances for what they really are. That's clear vision. That's a place that we want to spend more time. But we're human. We're gonna get caught up in circumstances. Can't help it. That's just part of being human. But the thing is to recognize it. And the sooner we can recognize it, the sooner we can breathe again, we can center, we can focus, we can rise above.
Yeah, thank you. That was a beautiful answer. Yeah, I love that.
I tend to get long-winded. I'm sorry.
No, it's beautiful. Could have you continue. It's really that's a beautiful book. I love the universal truth that you're sharing, and that basically happened to me. And I totally understand. It's all universal truth. It doesn't matter the labels. And I love the Christian mystics to the Hindu mystics. Like you use Ramakrishna. He says God is in all of us, but all of us are not in God, and that's where we suffer. So many beautiful sayings. Even Eckhart Tolle, when he had his awakening, he changed his name, named himself after Miser Eckhart, which I thought that was pretty cool. And
that is pretty cool.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you coming on. Definitely put your link down below once I upload your this beautiful episode, and hopefully have you on again. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.